started off with calculating nominal GDP, real GDP, and GDP deflator. And then we looked at how do we find the rate of inflation. Now we want to look at how do we find the growth rate of nominal and real GDP. So for this, let's recall how do we find the growth rate of a variable x in year t. So recall growth rate of xt. So this is, we want to find the growth rate of x of a variable x in year t. It's xt minus 1 by xt minus 1 into 100, right? So let's just do a bit of recall first. A growth rate. So basically what we're saying is, okay, the growth rate of x in any year t is the annual percentage change in x from previous year. Right, so using this, let's find the growth rate of nominal GDP 1996. Right, so growth rate. So the part one is that you want to find the growth rate of nominal GDP in 1996. So it's going to be the percentage change in nominal GDP from the previous year 1995. So it's going to be nominal GDP in 1996 minus nominal GDP 1995. And then we divide this entire thing by nominal GDP 1995 and you multiply it with 100. And this is something already found in part 1. This is like 6,610 minus 4,900 divided by 4,900. Let me just check. This is supposed to be 600. Okay, so then this is just 34.90% is the growth rate in nominal GDP in 1996. Now let's do the same for real GDP. So let's do the same for real GDP now. Okay, so let's just erase this. Now, obviously, we know whenever we're calculating real GDP and hence GDP deflation, we need to be careful about our choice of base year, right? We need to see what our base year is. So here we are doing the calculations for real GDP and what GDP deflator using 1995 as a base year. So using 1995, so we're doing part 2 now, using 1995 as a base year. So using 1999 as a base year, so we want to find growth rate of real GDP also in 1996. So growth rate of real GDP in 1996. So this is going to be real GDP 1996 because we know it's going to be the annual percentage change in real GDP from the previous year 1995. So minus real GDP in 1995. And then all of this divided by real GDP 1995 into 100. And we already calculated this in part 1 where this is 5,450. Obviously, all these real GDPs are calculated using 1995 as a base year now, right? So all of these calculations are done using 1995 as a base year. Minus 4,900 divided by 4,900 multiplied by 100 is equal to 11.22%. So this is how we found the growth rate of real GDP, where all of these were the real GDP in 1996 and real GDP in 1995 have been computed using 1995 as a base year. As you know, the value of real GDP, it depends upon the base year chosen. So now I want to compare the growth rate of real and nominal GDP calculated in part 3, right? For this, let's first recall something. So let's recall that number 1, changes in nominal GDP. We know nominal GDP is the market value of goods and services based on the current prices, right? Changes in nominal GDP can be due to changes in price, can be due to, so now changes in nominal GDP can be due to change in prices or change in quantity of output produced, right? Because we know we calculate real GDP as current year's output measured at current year prices. So nominal GDP in any year can change due to either change in prices because you're using current year prices and or changes in quantity of output produced. Or output could change as you're using current year output. Or changes in quantity of output produced, right? So either of this can cause change in nominal GDP. But changes in real GDP, because real GDP is calculated using current year's output based on constant base year prices. Because whenever you're calculating real GDP for any year, you're using the same base year prices. The only thing that can change real GDP is the changes in output, right? So changes in real GDP can only be due to changes in quantity of output produced. Like this is the key thing to remember. That is what real GDP allows us to. It allows us to see, okay, nominal GDP reflects changes in both prices and output because we're using current year output, current year prices. Real GDP only reflects changes in output as we're using constant base year prices. So it basically allows us to see, isolate the price change from the quantity change, which we're not able to separate in nominal GDP. Quantity of output produced. So now, having this in mind, let's apply this to this question. So now in this case, what we see is in this case, we know growth rate of nominal GDP. We just found these. Growth rate of nominal GDP in 1996 was basically 34.90%, right? This is greater than growth rate of real GDP, right? Growth rate of real GDP, oh sorry, nominal GDP 1996 of real GDP 1996, which was 11.20%, right? So growth rate of nominal GDP was more. As growth rate of nominal GDP, now this is because growth rate of nominal GDP, right, reflects increase in both physical output, which is represented by the increase in real GDP. Both physical output, right? Because we know growth rate of real GDP is greater than zero, right? So this means that nominal GDP has grown. One reason for the growth of nominal GDP is that your output has gone up. 1996 is greater than zero. And increase in prices, because when we calculated inflation rate in part 2, that was also positive. Inflation rate of 1996 was also positive, it was 21.28%, right? So we know that real GDP has grown only because of increase in quantity, but nominal GDP's growth rate is more than growth rate of real GDP because we don't just have an increase in physical output, but we have an increase in prices also represented by the positive inflation rate. While it's only change in quantity affects real GDP, while only change in. So whenever you're looking at comparing the growth rate of real and nominal GDP, it's important to keep in mind the growth rate of real GDP is only due to change in output. Now that change in output would also affect nominal GDP, but there will be another factor affecting it, which is the change in prices, right? So the difference between the growth rates occurs due to the inflation rate, right? Depending upon what the inflation rate is, while only change in quantity affects real GDP. So the difference is because of the inflation rate, because that's going to affect the growth rate of nominal GDP, but not real GDP. So this is mainly the difference increase in prices, right? So whenever you're looking at the difference, so you always look at what's happening to prices, the inflation rate.